Hello, everybody. I am Queen, your host for Prefect Live today. We are thrilled to have Ryan Peden, a senior developer experience engineer at Prefect, to talk about how to use cloud events to trigger Prefect automations. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so um, how was your holiday in Canada?
It was good. It started out snowy. It snowed for
Mhm.
like 4 straight days. I couldn't leave my house. And then it got warm and it all melted and it's raining now. So it was kind of an adventure. But my family still they drove through the blizzard to visit me and I still had to see
Wow.
everybody. So it was a great time. How was it for you?
Where's your family is from? Are they also in Canada?
Yeah, they're all from the Toronto area. So,
Right.
an hour or two drive usually, but
Mhm,
it took like
mhm.
3 or 4 hours because of the snow. But you know what? They still made it. They were very determined. So, it made me happy.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I and my husband visit his family in Springfield, and we visit some extended family as well. And yeah, so that was very fun. We meet up with some friends and have some good meals and some board games. So that
Sounds
was
like you
fun.
made the most of the holidays then.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to see my family in Vietnam as well to celebrate Lunar New Year in 1 week.
Oh, that
Um,
sounds great. That'll be exciting.
yeah. Um, okay. Are you ready for the presentation?
I am ready to dive in. Let's do it.
Okay.
So, hey everyone. So I'm here to talk to you today about cloud events and prefect automations because this is one of my favorite ways to use this new prefect feature. It's still in beta. I think we're targeting launch in the middle of January. And if you haven't used automations, they're essentially triggers plus actions that you can take in response to a trigger. And right now you can trigger automations based on flow run states and work queue status. And I should have a tab ready to show you that, just for anyone who hasn't seen automations yet. Um, and if you look through our Prefect live history on YouTube, you'll see in December, Will was a guest and he went through all the details about automations. If you haven't watched that, I really recommend it. I learned a lot from it. But essentially, here's how it works. You have flow run states and work queue health, and you can choose a flow, and if you go, you can choose different actions based on that. Um, and this ability unlocks something really cool, I gotta say, because a few months ago, I wrote a tutorial on how to create event-driven flows by embedding your flow in an Azure function. And my colleague Anna wrote the same thing using AWS Lambda. Now, the reason that's really cool in combination with automations, let's see if I can get back to my presentation here, is that this lets you trigger prefect automations using a huge number of events that all the different cloud providers support. So, a few of them, like Azure, everything in this trigger column here is something that you can use to launch an Azure function. Um, Similar list for AWS and a smaller but still useful list for Google. And they probably have a bigger list somewhere else. And Google also has Firebase functions, which have their own set of events. So, to sum it up, there's a huge number of things you can use to run a prefect flow based on something that happens somewhere in the cloud. So, just to give you an idea of how that looks, here is my really simple prefect flow that I want to run in an
You
Azure function.
might you might zoom in into the code.
Sure, if I can. How's that? So this just simulates. So I'm simulating here something I actually use Azure for is processing Google Transit data because the way I launched my software career 13 years ago was writing an app that took all the transit data for Ottawa in Google Transit format, took it all, unzipped it, processed the CSV, and shoved it into a couple different databases, and wrap that all in a Ruby on Rails app that sort of did a much better job of showing all the transit stop times and trip planning than the official Ottawa Transit app did. And then I sort of started going to tech meetups and started showing that to CTOs of startups around the city, and eventually one of them decided to hire me. And that's how my whole career got started. So whenever I try and do a demo or experiment with things, I tend to go back to that data because I find working with transit data a lot of fun. So I'm not actually opening it here. I'm just sort of simulating what I would do. But typically how this would work is this is a function that is triggered by whenever a file gets dropped into an Azure Blob Storage bucket. If you go through that tutorial, I guess we can put the links on YouTube when we post this, but I posted it on the Prefect discourse. But go through the steps and you create a blob storage bucket, you create a function app, and you push this code. So main is what gets run when a blob drops into this bucket. Azure will run the function. It calls main, and main calls verify transit zip, which I would usually, once the blob appears, I would download it, just verify the zip file is its integrity is okay. Nothing fancy. But the nice thing is having this as a flow means that I can now use it to trigger actions or automations. As you can use it, sort of use it as a trigger for my automations to run other actions. So to give you an idea of how that looks, so it's going to go back here. So my Azure Transit Data Verifier is the flow I created. So if I choose that.
Can you also zoom in your UI a little bit?
Yeah, let me just do that here. So in this case, I want to do things if my flow succeeds. So in this case, it would be, I have some external process that will occasionally drop a new set of transit data into a blob bucket or a blob container, what Azure calls it. And I could check this on a schedule, but I don't really want to. I don't need to be running this flow periodically to check. I just want it to run once when the new data appears. I don't know in advance when it's going to appear. It could happen any time of day, really. So it makes it a perfect fit for an event trigger automation, triggered by something that happens in the cloud. So in this case, say I want to do something actually, before I do this, let me show you what happens. I'm just going to quickly upload a file to my blob store here. Now, if I wait just a minute, it takes Azure a minute to process it and run the function. But when it does, I won't wait too long for it, but okay, I'm gonna start going through the automation. I'll come back to that. So let's say I want to do something when my transit data verifier completes. Now I've set up a couple of deployments, things that I might want to do after I've verified that the data was updated and the zip file looks good. So what I might want to do, so there are a bunch of actions you can take. In this case, I really just want to run a deployment. So there are a couple of things. I might want to unzip it, and inside the zip are a bunch of CSV files. I might want to upload those to a blob so I can do something else to it later on. And also, I might want to take all that data and also push it into a Postgres database so I can use it in, say, the UI app that I mentioned earlier.
So Ryan, where did you set up those actions in advance?
I set them up in advance, and I'll show you and of course, now that I want it, the Azure app to run, it's not showing up. So
Is there a way that you can check the status.
Yeah, give me a second. Check the Azure portal. I tried this right before the call, and it all worked perfectly. So of course it's not running now. Let me just quickly take a look. All right, I'm going to try this one more time, and hopefully it'll work. And if it doesn't, I'll just talk through it and pretend it's working.
Okay.
All right, I'm uploading my file. And last time I did this, it ran the function, and it showed up in my flow runs. I'm going to give it a few seconds here.
Ryan, while we wait, can you go back to your script? So I have some questions related
Yeah, of
to it.
course.
Okay, so what is Funk input stream? Is it like an event?
That is so that's something that's provided by Azure Functions, and so in this case, input stream can be a different thing depending on how you configure your function. Like
Right.
in function JSON here, it depends. It depends on the binding you set up, and the kind of data you receive depends on what kind of trigger you get.
Okay. So what happened is when you upload your data, the function man will run.
Yeah, so let me show you in here. So in Azure, I created a storage bucket called transit data. Let me see if I can just pull up that tab.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully Azure won't give away, like, show me any secret key like that. But if it does, I'll just delete them afterward. Let me just find it here. Yeah, I'm gonna drag the tab over. All right, so this is my transit data container on Azure. All right, so the gtfs.zip showed up there, so that part of it worked. Now if I look at flow runs, it's not showing up. So
Do you
this
have your
is the part
previous
I promise worked right before I
Did you delete all your previous experiments?
I did, yeah,
Oh
because I
no.
wanted to run it from scratch live here.
Yeah.
So looks like it's going to turn into a live failure. All right, I'm gonna pretend it worked.
Okay.
So say it runs, but it doesn't actually do anything by itself. All it does is verify that the zip file is good on its own. I mean, that's useful, but it doesn't actually do anything else. But what I can do with actions is decide that, hey, I want to unzip the CSV files, push them into a different blob container, but I also want to process them and push them to Postgres. So I have these two actions here. So I click next to finish process GTFS. So what happens is that whenever the flow runs successfully now, assuming it did, as soon as it finishes, those two other deployments will be scheduled in parallel. So it's scheduled to start at the same time. So I can have these two deployments running in parallel that do two different things to the data that just got dropped into my blob storage container, which is pretty cool, because I mean I could have done that before by like manually calling the deployments in my function code, but that's kind of brittle. It's kind of fragile or inflexible, I would say, because that means every time if I decide I want to do something extra in response to that data, I have to go edit the code and redeploy it, and that's kind of a pain. And I might want to make it so that people who don't have access to my Azure function can still trigger deployments in response to it. And so automations in Prefect make that possible. They don't have to be able to see my code on Azure or be able to deploy it or run it. All they need to do is create an automation that does something, takes some action or actions, after my code runs. So for me, that's like a really cool use case for automations, because not only can I trigger other workflows in response to things that happen in, say, my Prefect deployments. I can just trigger automations and other workflows in response to anything that happens, almost anything that happens in the cloud. So I think that's I mean, it depends on how you're working with data and like how your team uses the cloud. But in teams I've worked on, we used excuse me, serverless functions for everything. And if we'd had Prefect and actually specifically automations, it would have saved us like months of work probably, because we basically created a terrible half implementation of Prefect for ourselves, and we didn't really want to. And that's what we would here at Prefect would call negative engineering. We spent more time on negative engineering than we did actually building the things we needed to build. So yeah, I mean, if I for certain teams at least, this specific use of automations, I think, will be like a huge time saver.
That is a very cool use case.
Yeah, it'd be a cooler use case if it actually
Sure.
ran what I expected it to.
Right. Okay. So question, what are the actions? Are they flows?
They are flows. Yeah. So
Okay.
actually, I can show you those if I have the
Mhm.
window here somewhere. Move things around a little bit. Yeah, and again, these are simulated. I did have a few tasks. First, you have to download the blob, unzip it, and then a task that would push to simulate pushing the CSVs to storage, and another task to simulate pushing the data to Postgres. And so I can reuse those tasks. I reuse the first two tasks, and then just see. Interesting. So my agent actually received those and ran. They just didn't show up. I'm gonna try like a actual like full refresh here.
Hey, I saw
Oh,
something.
they're here. It just didn't
Yay.
refresh. It was cached.
So I guess you need to do Command Shift R, right?
Yeah, that's what I did. So all right, so
Mhm.
here's the one that ran. So it pretended, hey, I'm processing the zip file, and then was actually okay. So now it's actually completed. So here it ran those tasks that I scheduled or I told it to run.
Right.
There we
That's
go.
super cool. So
Yeah. So
basically you use a flow to trigger another flow, to trigger two other flows, right?
yeah, and they were. And the nice thing is, all these flows were triggered, by something that happened in the cloud. It was triggered by like a native Azure event, like a blob storage event. The equivalent on AWS would be dropping something into an S3 bucket, right? And
Right.
you can kick off a whole cascade of flows, based on that happening, something happening totally outside of Prefect, totally outside of your deployments, but you can still use one of those events to kick off a series of deployments. And so in my automation here, I can edit here. So I have like two actions, and these get scheduled in parallel. If I wanted to, do something that happened after one of these, I could then, create another automation where the trigger would be, GTFS to blob finishing, and I could do other things based on that. So, I could use a series of automations to then trigger other automations. So there's
Interesting.
almost no limit to what you can do with this.
Can you actually show me how to do that? Just
Sure.
doesn't need to trigger, but just show you
Sure.
want,
So
yeah.
where let's need to find it here. I have too many flows and I can't find it.
You can just use a random flow. You don't need to
Okay, yeah.
run
So it'll be in
execute.
here somewhere. So
Yeah.
say it's there, and then so say this flow was the one that I triggered in another automation. When I can make it so that when it finishes, it runs other deployments as a result.
Right.
Multiple deployments, even if I wanted to.
So the action are the deployments, right?
actions, well, you can run a deployment, but you can also
Run a flow.
cancel flows, pause
Interesting.
schedules, pause work queues, or resume them. For this
Right.
use case, I think like run a deployment is like the big one for
Yeah.
me. But
So in
depending
order
on
to
what you need,
trigger all the flows, you need to create the deployment first.
yeah, it'll trigger the run the deployments. Yeah, I mean, I thought that
Cool.
I'd seen I watched a few of the presentations we've done on automations, and read lots of stuff, but I hadn't seen anyone cover this specifically, I don't think. And I think this is it's a really cool way to use them, especially I worked at companies where we don't just use one cloud service. We'll have some things running on AWS, but some things running on Azure. I think there's a case where we ran most of our stuff on Azure, but we really wanted to use some things on AWS. Like I think we wanted to use SageMaker, and so nice thing is that if I have an agent running an AWS, I can trigger something on Azure in a function, and have Prefect automation then run a deployment that gets picked up on AWS and say trains a model with SageMaker or something like that. So yeah, the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do. Just use your imagination.
And it's kind of like you put together a bunch of jigsaw puzzles as well. You can start with building a bunch of blocks, and those blocks are different deployments. And somebody else can come in and click automation, then put them together.
Yeah, exactly. So
Um,
once you built these things, you don't have to decide in advance
mhm.
how they're going to be put together, even, which is I think where automations shine over just running deployments from code. Because if you do it in code, you have to kind of decide in advance what's going to happen when. Whereas with automations, you can make your deployments first, and then find different ways to use them afterward.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having a lot of fun with automations. From what I've heard, some of our users are too. So
Mhm.
yeah, I just wanted to go through this quick, interesting use case,
Yeah.
because I definitely plan to use automations for some of my own projects, doing something almost exactly like this. Actually,
Yeah. Same for
I'm
me.
reviving this transit project, and I'm going to use Prefect to make it all work.
Right. So in this case, your event is a flow completed, right? A flow run
Yes,
completed. Okay. Um, and I think we are trying to, in the future, we're going to support not only flow runs, the status of flow runs, but also any, any kind of event. Is it correct?
I believe there's more coming. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know if there's specific dates on those, so I don't want to speak to them too much. But
Yeah.
I do know that what we have now isn't the end. It's just the beginning. We're just getting started with this.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Ryan, thank you for showing us your very cool application.
Thank you very much,
And
and thanks for being patient while it while it wasn't working, or while the caching was making it look like it wasn't working.
yeah, it turned out Command Shift R is the way to
Saved the
go.
day.
Yeah.
I'll need to remember that for next time.
Okay.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It was a lot of fun to come on here and share this with everyone, and hopefully it's useful to at least a few of the viewers watching this now, or who watch it later on.
Okay. Bye, Ryan.
Bye.